In this video, we're going to implement the logout session functionality using the delete HTTP method against /sessions/session ID route. This is the route that will be used when a user clicks or taps the logout button on their client application. So let's open Atom, and this is where we left off in the previous lesson. So if I scroll back up, we're in the sessions.php file. If I scroll back up, and you can see near the beginning where we created the outline for the /session/session ID route. So the first thing we need to do is fold up the empty one because we're finished with that now. So I'll fold it up just to make it a bit easier so we can see where we are. Create some space here because we're going to be dealing with the session ID. So the routes for this will be /sessions/ and then obviously an ID. So it could be 5 or 3, something like that. In this lesson, we're going to be dealing with the delete session, which is a logout. Just remove that. So the first thing we need to do is to get the session ID from the URL. So we'll store that in a variable and we'll call it session ID. And then we'll use the get global variable. And it will be session ID. So now that we've got the session ID, we need to perform some validation checks. We need to make sure that it's not blank and that it is a numerical number, so it can't be text. So if we create an if statement, and the first thing is to check if it's blank. So session ID, and if it's equal to blank, or if it is, so if it's numeric, but if it's not numeric, so and then session ID, and then we're going to send a standard error response back. So I'm just going to copy this one and paste it here. So we'll change the status code. It's 400 because the client hasn't provided a correct session ID. And then we're going to change the error message. What we'll do here, we'll do the ternary operator. So we'll allow it to return multiple errors back. So like we've done in the previous lessons. So we'll just do these checks now. So if we do session ID equals and then blank, then we need to send a message back. So just copy that, paste that in there. Actually, we'll remove that so we don't complicate matters. And then we'll change this error message to be session ID cannot be blank. Get rid of the semicolon and put a normal colon and then false. So what we'll do is copy that, paste that here, and then we'll just change this so it's not numeric. Session ID, get rid of this. So if it's not numeric, and then we need to say session ID must be numeric. Okay, so that's that check carried out. The next check we need to do is on the access token that we're going to provide in the HTTP request headers. So when we send a request, we will include the access token in the HTTP request headers. Not in the body this time, it actually goes in the headers. And we'll show you how to do that when we test this shortly. So we need to perform some validation on that. There is a little fix we need to do in the htaccess file, which I'll explain later on. But basically, Apache, which is the web server, out the box, does not allow the authentication HTTP request header to be sent. So we have to enable that explicitly. Now, when I've read the documentation, it basically says for security purposes, it's turned off by default. But there is valid reasons to use it. You know, this is a valid reason, so we'll be turning it on later on in this video. So how we get this authorization header is to use the server global variable for HTTP underscore authorization. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that it is set, so it has been provided, and that it's not blank basically. So it's, you know, it's greater than, you know, 0 characters. So we'll do that now. So we need to do if it's not set. And then we use the server global variable, and it is HTTP authorization. Let's create some space so we can see what we're doing. So if that's not set, or if it So server HTTP authorization, and then we'll see if it's less than 1 character, because it should always be greater than 1 character or 1 character or above. To be honest, it should be more than 1 character because the access token is quite big. So we'll create that, and we need to do a response. So we'll copy this one because it's half set up for us, and we'll paste that in there. And this one's going to be a 401 error, because the 401 error means unauthorized, or the authorization token hasn't been provided yet. That's what the documentation says. So 401 is what we use for this. The ternary operator for the messages we're going to send back is basically these here. So these are the checks, so we'll just change this at the beginning. So we'll do is set, and then it is server, and then it's HTTP authorization. So if it's not set, we need to send a message or add a message that says access token is missing from the header. And the next check we need to do is the length of it. So if we change this one here and strlen, and then it is underscore server, and then it's HTTP authorization, and we need to say that is less than 1. So if it's less than 1, we need to say access token cannot be blank. That's the second bit of validation we're performing there. So if it's past that validation, we need to get the value that's been passed in the HTTP authorization header, which is our access token. So we'll store that in a variable. Access token equals server HTTP underscore authorization. So that's how we get the access token from the authorization HTTP header. And the next thing we need to do is to check the request method. Now, in this route here, so /sessions/session ID, we're going to be able to deal with delete and patch. They're the two that we're going to be able to submit to this. We're not bothered about post because post's handled in the /sessions route. So we need to create the placeholders here using the if statement. So if server and its request method, and we need to say if it equals delete, then this. Otherwise, so else if server request method equals patch, because that's the other one we're going to deal with in the next video, which will be used for refreshing an access token. Otherwise, we need to send a standard error back. So else, and then what we need to do, we're going to copy this one here, copy this, because it's just an error response. We're going to change the code to a 405, which is method not allowed. And then success is false. And then we're going to get rid of these because we're only going to send one message back. So response add message. And the message is going to be request method not allowed. Okay, so you can either send the delete or patch. So we're not going to deal with patch in this video. We're going to deal with explicitly, delete, because that's what logs out a user session. So if I just create some space under delete. So what we need to do is to attempt to delete the row or the session out of TBL sessions where the session ID and the access token match. We're not going to be bothered about checking if the access token's active because we are actually logging out. We're not doing anything, modifications to any data that belongs to us. It is just logging out a session. So as with every database query, we're going to run this between a try and catch. So try and then catch, and it'll be PDO, exception, and then EX. And what we'll do here, I'm just going to get rid of that white space. What we'll do here in the catch is to create our standard response. So if I just copy this one and then paste it there, we'll change that to a 500 error because obviously something's gone wrong with a query, you know, some sort of database error. And then we're going to change the message to there was an issue logging out. Please try again. And then within the try, we need to write the query. So query. Sorry, that's wrong. Query equals write db, and then it's prepare. And then we're going to write delete from TBL sessions, where ID equals the passed in session ID, which we'll add in a second. And access token equals the passed in access token within the HTTP request header. Access token. And then we'll bind the parameters. So query bind param. So the first one is session ID. Oops, session ID. And that was the ID that we got from the session ID here. So session ID. So that's session ID, and it's PDO, oops, param integer, and query bind param, and this is for access token, and whoops, and that access token is the one that we've received in here from the authorization HTTP header that was stored in this variable. So that's access token, and this is going to be PDO param string. So now we need to try and execute it. So query execute, and then we need to check the row count. So row count equals query row count. So if we do if row count equals 0, then basically this means that for the passed in session ID and access token, it's managed to delete a row. If it has deleted a row, the row count will be 1. However, if someone tries to, you know, log out of a session with an access token that no longer exists or is invalid, or they've just tried the luck to log a random session out, this is the handler for that error. So we'll copy this response to save a bit time, paste it in there, and this is going to be a 400 error. And then we're going to change this message to failed to log out of this session using access token provided. So it kind of means that if the session does exist, you've used the wrong access token, or the session may already be logged out. That's all that is. However, if that row count is 1, that means that we've actually logged out, we've deleted the session. So we just need to send a response back to say, you know, you've successfully logged out. So the way we do that is use the return data. We've done obviously this in the previous lessons. Return data array, return data, and then all we're kind of going to return is the session ID of the logged out session. So session ID, and then this will be, we'll make sure that it is an integer because we want to return an integer value back. So session ID, because if we look up here, it doesn't really know what it is. You know, it might be text. We haven't really, you know, said this is an integer at this point. So we want to return the integer. So we'll just scroll down. So we just wrap it in the int val. So now that we've done that, we need to set up our response. So response equals new response set HTTP status code, and this is going to be 200, which is an OK message because everything's worked. And then response set success, and this is true. Response, add a message, and we're going to say logged out. That's fine. We need to set the return data, so response set data, and that is the return data, and then we need to send, and then we need to exit. Okay, we'll get rid of this white space, tidy it up a little bit. Okay, so hopefully this should work. I mean, we need to change the htaccess file in a moment, but I'm just going to quickly run through this. So session ID, make sure we're on that root, get the session ID, do some validation on the session ID, make sure it's not blank and that it is numeric. If it's not, then create a standard error. Try and get the HTTP authorization header code, which is our access token that we're going to provide. Do some validation on that. Save it in a variable. Check to see which request method we are using. We're dealing with delete in this video. We've created, if I scroll down, we've created the one for patch, which will be done in the next video. So if I go back up to the top, we'll then try the database query, which is to delete from TBL sessions, where the ID is the passed in session ID and the access token is the passed in access token. We'll check to see if it's successfully deleted a session. If it hasn't, we send a response back to say failed to log out of this session. Otherwise, we return the session ID of the logged out session. So the client could, if that's recorded the session, that could clear that down. So now that we've done that, we'll go to our htaccess file, which is there. And we need to create a route for the next one. So first of all, we'll create it here. So we will rewrite rule, and it's going to be sessions / and then all we're going to do is copy this format here. So brackets, and then it's square brackets, and then it's 0 to 9, and then it's a plus. And then we're going to end the regular expression with a $, and that is going to map to controller / sessions.php, and then it's session ID equals $1, and that is the last one. So we'll save that. So what we're doing here is picking up the value after /sessions /, which will then be a session ID, which is in number. That is going to map to controller / sessions.php, which is the file that we're currently using. And then session ID, remember the check for that we've done in this file. Let's just scroll up slightly. Oh, too far. So make sure session ID exists and get that value, and that's our session ID. Well, that session ID maps to this, and the value is the value passed in to the URL for the root. So the next thing we need to do is to do the fix for the authorization header, because obviously, like I mentioned, Apache disables that by default, so we need to enable it specifically for our use. And the way you do that is to, right at the top, you need to set an environmental variable, so set env if, and it's for the authorization, authorization. Then what we do is dot plus, and then http underscore authorization equals, and then $0. So we'll save that. So basically all it's doing is if it's passed in, and then we're going to use that and map it to this header for PHP to pick up from. That's all the fix does. Like I say, Apache disable it by default, and if you do want to use it, you just have to enable it like this. This is important that you have this in here, otherwise when we run our tests next, if you didn't have this code in, it wouldn't pass the access token in. So this is important to have. So what we should be able to do now is to test this. Now if we open Postman, what we're going to have to do is actually try a login to begin with to get a session and a session ID. So if we do a post, so http localhost port 8888 /v1 /sessions, and then in the body, under raw, we need to set application JSON, and we need to pass in a username and password. So the username, if you remember the user that we created, so username was Michael, and the password is password 123, I think I created it as. So if I now send that, what we should get is a login and an access token. So you can see that our session ID is 2, and that's our access token. So if I just quickly go back to PHPMyAdmin, go into the sessions table, go to browse, you can see that was our session from the last video that we created. To be honest, we can actually delete that just to make things a bit easier for us. So this is our new session. So you can see there, that's our session ID, that's our access token. So what we want to do is actually log out of this session. So if I go back to Postman, I'm just going to leave this open because I'm going to need these values. Create a new request. This is going to be a delete request. And it's going to be HTTP localhost port 8888/v1/sessions. But now we need to provide the session ID. Remember, going back to this one, the session ID is 2. So it's /sessions/2. So if I just send that now, you can see here that I've got an error in the sessions file. So if I quickly go and double check that. So it's saying it's line 25. So I'll go into here, go to 25. So I've made a bit of a typo there. It actually is _numeric. And I'll just double check this one as well because I've made the same mistake there. Yep, that all looks fine now. So it was just because I made a bit of a typo. So it is _numeric, and just make sure you change in the ternary operator as well for the message. So save that, go back to Postman, and we'll try it again. So you can see there, because we haven't provided an access token, you can see access token is missing from the header and access token cannot be blank. So there are our 2 messages that we pushed in. So 401 authorization required. So it means that we haven't actually provided any authentication yet. So now what we need to do is provide the access token. If we go to headers, and the access token will be in the authorization. So authorization, that's what the header is called for the HTTP. So now if I send that, so it says it's missing because it's not there. So if I quickly go back to this request up here, copy my access token, which is that one there, go back here and paste that into here. So you can see that that's our access token. It's in the authorization request HTTP header. So if I send that, you can see now we have been logged out, and we get data for session ID, the session ID that we've logged out of. So now if I go to PHPMyAdmin, browse or refresh that, you can see we don't have an active session anymore. We've actually logged out. So if I just go back to Postman and go back to the login, we'll just send that again because I want to create a new session. So we've got a new access token. We've got a new a session ID as well. So now we're on session ID 3. So I'm just going to copy that because I want to show you that the validation for the access token is working. So we'll go back to our delete, change the session ID to 3 because now we've got a new session ID. Replace this value for the authorization access token. So we'll put in our new one. And I'm just going to make a modification to this. So we'll say change the uppercase M at the beginning to a lowercase m. So now in theory this access token may, look the same. It might easily be missed. But this has just proven that the validation on uppercase and lowercase is working. So what we should have here is an error message returned. So failed to log out of this session using the access token provided. So that means that our access token is incorrect. So if I change that back to an M, and just before I delete that, let's go to PHPMyAdmin, browse. That's our session that we're going to be deleting, which means logging out. Go back to Postman and submit that. So you can see now that we've logged out again, and we've got a session ID of 3. So that's our previous session ID. Go back to PHPMyAdmin, refresh that, and you can see that we no longer have a session in that table. Okay, so in this lesson, we've went through creating the functionality to log out a user session using the delete HTTP request method. In the next lesson, we'll be learning how to refresh a token once it's expired. And for that, we'll be using the /sessions/session ID and using the patch request method. So we'll see you in that video.